All right, here's the first lesson of Chapter 3 for the second unit. We're planting the English colonies. You should have a title page and timeline for Chapter 3 set to go at this point. Doing a little brain flex bell work on your DBQ packet hook exercise. It's a map activity. Consider the question here when you complete that activity. Top of the left-hand side, discuss the difficulties and ultimate success in establishing the English colony of Jamestown. Address why it is that so many died. We'll be working on some documents from the DBQ project for this. And here's your snap chart. I would make this snap chart on the entire left side for now. We'll do a little bit of writing with this with a writing assignment here a little bit later. So our writing is going to be on a separate sheet of paper. But left side this chart that snaps it, the question down for us here. So you can plan and collect information, organize your thoughts. We're going to consider in all this our bagpipe themes. You have that insert. That is a short review of thematic thinking in history. We should have our thoughts geared toward geographic and environmental factors to answer the question. Identity, class, gender, who's coming, who's settling, and who's involved in this event. To answer the question, politics and power, who's in charge, who's in control, who sets the rules, what are the conditions like in the settlement, work and exchange, what's the economy like there, what are they going for, what's driving the settlement, and people and migration. The relationship between our settlers and Native Americans is going to be a little bit significant here. First of all, though, we have to get back into England and Spain and the rivalries and the competition between different nations here being a factor here in this colonization effort. We left off in the previous chapter talking about Queen Elizabeth and her significance in helping stabilize England that had a lot of religious turmoil going on and internal struggles going on. That pretty much gets settled down with her, and she's the one that starts looking to establish and put pressure towards establishing an English colony in North America. There is, of course, rivalries involved with this, and because of trade, because of economic opportunities that are there. There's religious differences with other competing countries, especially Spain. Remember, the 17th century, the 1600s, is the century of Spain, and so England is the underdog here. And King Philip II of Spain is in competition in other ways. There is that religious factor here in which we have a Protestant nation, essentially, in name, England, on a different path than Catholic Spain. And he would like to see England and the English crown go back toward Catholicism. So there's conflicts of interest between both of them for both of those reasons. Philip proposes marriage to Queen Elizabeth, and she says, get lost. And the reason why? Well, religion. She's Protestant. He's Catholic. And, of course, there's some national identity and national pride there, and she just wasn't interested in getting married and never did. And so, essentially, he ends up marrying one of her half-sisters, Mary, who is also Catholic. But it kind of irks him, and he is kind of come up with another plan to make this Catholicism come back to England. England is competing with Spain by employing people like privateers, one of your key terms. And privateers are, just like the word says, private people who own their own ships, such as Sir Francis Drake, will be encouraged and supported by Queen Elizabeth to attack Spanish ships and ports, take what they have, and bring it back for England. And this guy kind of becomes a real major hero, and he's well known for what he's doing all throughout Europe, and Philip wants him punished. Elizabeth honors him with knighthood, and he gets really irked about that, very irritated with that. And ultimately, all of these things that we've talked about that are conflicts between the two nations lead to something called the Spanish Armada invasion of England in 1588. He hatches this plan. They are the largest military power on the planet by far. He sends his massive armada that he's developed with large amounts of wealth being drawn from his new Spanish colonies, and it fails completely. And the fleet itself is actually wiped out, what is left after the major battles, to an attempt to invade England and make it Catholic again. and expand Spanish dominance in Europe and the New World. What's left as it's coming back to Spain is destroyed in a massive storm. Big kind of fluke of fate there with Mother Nature taking a role here in all this. And with this major loss, despite there's going to be wars that continue on over the next several years, we have Spanish really starting to go on, Spain going on the decline in their dominance in the New World and in Europe, and it's opening up the way for English colonization. And they will be at war essentially until about 1604. So 1588, a big turning point. Key thing in history for us are terms of turning points. 1588 is a key factor here in English colonization. So this is a major victory for the English and Queen Elizabeth, and she establishes the rights and gives the rights to a charter, a document, a legal document, to a guy by the name of Sir Walter Raleigh to go establish and organize settlements for England in the New World. 1584. 1585, he settles a place called Roanoke. Who's going there? Young military men. Women, not really. Present-day North Carolina is where it's at, even though this is really all Virginia colony, or Virginia, as it's referenced by the English. And it is a location where there's pretty much sand. It's way out here, as you can see. Sandbanks. It's treacherous. It's not easy to get to. They put it there for that reason, because they felt it was more protective for them, protective from Spanish ships. They're really intent on launching their privateer ships out into the ocean and harassing the Spanish ships that are down here south toward Florida and Georgia, floating over across the Atlantic back to Spain and taking what they have. But the attempt fails in 1585. In 1587, they try it again. And at that point in time, they bring some men, mostly men, some women, and some children under John White. It fails again. And it fails because of all these factors. The location was difficult and dangerous to get into. Even English supply ships didn't want to go there to resupply the place. It was risky for them. As they come there, they expected Native Americans to feed them. This generates conflict. This is the same mindset that the Spanish had, in which they just enslaved Native Americans. Native Americans here didn't take well to that. There's a poor water supply and soil there, so you're not really going to grow anything, so therefore you really have to have Native Americans support you. It's just a really geographically, environmentally bad spot to exist in. The second attempt under John White it results in him actually returning back to England for more supplies. He doesn't return for 3 years, and he gets caught up in and is unable to get back to the colony because of this Spanish-English war that's going on. And when he comes back finally in about 1590, they find nothing left. There's a fort that was roughly built in these words called Croton carved in one of the posts, which nobody's really ever completely deciphered, but there's not a trace of anyone, and it becomes known as the Lost Colony. This particular piece in your notes, there is a clip online for your home learning. Complete it when you get a chance, when your internet comes back up after the hurricane, in terms of the economics of Jamestown and why it is people are coming there. So Jamestown is the second and the first successful attempt at establishing an English presence in the New World. It's given a charter, or some merchants are given a charter, who are given legal right to settle in this place called Virginia. Large region, covers many states that we know of today, as I mentioned, South Carolina and North Carolina. And what it essentially sets up, or what these merchants set up, is something called a joint stock company. And this joint stock company, as you look at the words, the term merchant and the word joint stock, merchants jointly coming together. Think of a joint in your arm or your knee joint or elbow joint, two bones coming together, two merchants coming together, merchants with people largely of some money invest in this effort to establish the settlement there so that they can draw resources back to for themselves, back to the New World, or back to England rather, and make money off of it. This is essentially the beginnings of corporations at this time, companies that we know. Think of IBM, think of General Electric, think of course, Amazon, those kind of companies, right? Investors, stock investors, people are coming together to make this happen, and it's expensive to get people over there and get ships supplied and things like that. So the settlement is established in this place called Chesapeake Bay area, which is present-day Virginia and Maryland. They're looking largely for gold and silver. They're playing off of what the Spanish had success with. This is what is in everybody's mind. And they're also going to trade for fish and furs with Native Americans and things of that nature. And so in 1607, they're going to settle right in here. In this close-up version, you can see there's a lot of water. You did a little bit of map work on this already, and if there's a lot of water, there are a lot of other little things that fly around, and the climate, you can imagine what that's like. A little bit humid. So in 1606, we have 144 settlers making that voyage. 40 of them die along the way. John Smith is the guy that's leading it. They set up a fort that looks like this. The remnants of the fort have been found. They are located. You can go see them. And this is Jamestown. They're having some significant hardships. Disease, hunger is significant here. People that are there are largely men. They repeat the same era that they did with Roanoke right away. They aren't coming to settle a community or a new society. They're coming to make money, right? They're coming to look for gold. But they're not going to find gold. And because they're not intending to be farmers and they're looking for something else, and they intend for Native Americans to also establish things for them that they need, or find things for them that they need, such as food, there becomes some significant starvation going on here. And this guy by the name of Captain John Smith, a political leader, right, fitting into one of the themes for our essential question, basically sets up the rule that if you do not work, you will not eat, and everybody must grow something. And we'll see exactly what types of people are coming here and are present here a little bit later, when we start looking at some documents on this Jamestown settlement. He did seek positive relations with the Powhatan Confederacy, a set of tribes led by Chief Powhatan, to get food and to support themselves. But because of this pressure on Native Americans to support them and such, it was a scenario where there was really bad relations with Native Americans, and it wasn't good. He returns to England in 1609, and without his strong leadership, they kind of fall apart even further, and this leads to this next year being labeled the Starving Time, 1609 to 1610. Fighting breaks out with Native Americans as the settlers there encroach onto their lands, and they try to hunt on their lands, and they disturb the hunting patterns of the animals and movement patterns of the animals and things like that, and they get very hostile. When people get hungry, people get a little irritable, right? Well, this is in the extreme. So the success of this colony is very much up in the air, and they barely survived through the Starving Time in 1609 and 1610. But a guy by the name of John Rolfe comes in 1610, and he comes to this colony in that next spring with something called tobacco seeds from some of the West Indies, Spanish West Indies. And these are highly valuable seeds. They, by Spanish law, are illegal to give to any other country because they're incredibly valuable. They're growing this stuff in those Spanish possessions, and tobacco is going to Europe, but not in massive amounts quite yet. But people are exposed to it, and people who have wealth are exposed to it. But soon this plant takes off, and it's well suited in this area of the Chesapeake Bay. Further inland, it's a little right along the coast where Jamestown is established. The soil is solid enough to plant these things. It's moist. There's plenty of water. But this all of a sudden desire to plant something that becomes very profitable. They've got money now that's eventually going to come in from Europe to buy this stuff. They can buy the things that they need from the money made off of this plant. This is going to create a little bit of a challenge with Native Americans and problems with them, in that this is going to mean that Native Americans now have something very valuable, and that is land necessary for the planting of these things. This is going to result in all kinds of wars and conflicts, and no really need or desire to work with Native Americans. So the Virginia colony is going to prosper. Here's our economic theme in our question, right? It's going to prosper because of this thing called tobacco. And it's going to prosper also, and it kind of survives this early tough time because of this gal by the name of Pocahontas, as we all know from the Disney films, so on and so forth. And she is going to eventually marry John Rolfe. I believe in the Disney movie that it's John Smith, right? But history says it's John Rolfe, and but she does save John Smith's life, who at one point in time it seemed like he was going to be killed by her father, Chief Powhatan, Chief of the Powhatan. So with this, this helped them through that time, and John Rolfe and the Virginia colonists do establish positive relations with Native Americans for a period of time until, again, the need for more land comes up with the growing of tobacco and the wealth that's made off of this tobacco. So Powhatan and Pocahontas are a factor in that, relations with Native Americans. Well, we're going to read a little bit of an article on this in the future to kind of support what we're talking about and introducing to you here. But there will be some significant bloodshed and violence later on. But early on, fairly positive for a few years. In 1616, the Rolfes traveled to England after they got married. Here's Pocahontas. She doesn't look very Native American there, right? Painted by a Englander. And she was a celebrity. She died very young, I think at age 26, somewhere in there. But nonetheless, the colony of Virginia is, in Jamestown, Virginia, is going to start booming. Land ownership is going to be expanded. There's going to be a system that you need to know, and it's called the head-rated system that is established. One of the key things that is a problem in making the New World successful in terms of colonization is that there is so much work to do, and there's so little in terms of labor. The Native Americans weren't going to do the work. It didn't work for the Spanish. It definitely is not going to work for the English here. And so how do you get people there to do the work, to clear the land, to plant the crops? So you come up with a system. That's the head-right system. And that basically says that if you have money enough to pay for somebody else to come over to the New World, you will get 50 acres of land. And then later on, they expand that. If you want to pay for the way for more people to come to the colony, we'll give you 50 more acres of land. This means that those that have money are going to make more money and continue to make more money. And land is money, and land and money are kind of two and the same and all together. It takes money to get the land, and once you've got more land, then you make more money. This is going to kind of leave some people a little bit out of the question in terms of growing wealth, and we'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about indentured servitude here in a second. And so this is going to get people over to the colony to work. In 1619, there's some major famous firsts here that happened in 1619. Just a few years, 10 years after the first establishment of the colony here. So we have the first African Americans arriving in North America. There were no slave laws in place, but at first it's understood that they probably were treated as indentured servants, which they were under a contract to gain their freedom after a few years, and the contract probably lasted about 7 years, as it did for anybody else who had their way paid for by someone of wealth. You basically paid that back by entering into a contract for indentured servitude. And when you fulfilled your contract of 7 years, then you became free. And so these people that were indentured servants, they're the ones that are going to be out here doing the work and clearing the fields and planting the crops. And gradually, more and more African Americans and actual slaves will become coming over to the colonies. But heavily indentured servants, going back here a little bit, indentured servants are the prime number one labor source, and most of them are coming from England. And we'll talk about why they're coming from England a little bit later. What are the factors there? So as we have the growth of some slaves, some are slaves and some are indentured servants. Slave laws start to get passed during this time. You notice that this is talking about Massachusetts here. When we settled the other colonies, eventually slavery becomes possible and legal in all the others. We'll talk about why it fades away in some and not others in the future. And we also in 1619 have the establishment of the first representative government in the colonies. The House of Burgesses meet for the first time in Jamestown itself. And as other little towns are established outside of Jamestown, each town would elect a burgess, a representative, who was required to have land in order to be a burgess, and they would make the laws. And so if you were a representative, you had to have land, and you can probably tell by the picture in the image here that, as we already probably know, they were all men. All right, and so we have a representative system of government coming over here, and a democracy kind of establishing itself, similar to what's in England, but it's going to be a little bit different, and we'll talk about how it's a little bit different. So this chart is different that you saw in the previous chart at the very beginning, but I broke it down here into just general factors enabling this settlement and factors allowing for success. But I would like you to go ahead and take these and plug these into the chart and categorize them thematically. And again, you've got your cheat sheet there in your notebook as to different types of thematic thinking. I would like you to go ahead and plug that in, each of those items there, into one of these thematic categories here on this particular sheet. All right, so that is that. Now you should be working on your left-hand side at this point in time. We've unpacked the question with a chart, snapped it down, planning for our writing, chunking up our thinking. Now you need to go ahead and pack it together. Make hay.